The following is a presentation of the Steamboat Church of Christ in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. We hope that you find today's lesson, presented by our minister, Dr. Joseph Becker, informative, insightful, and inspirational.
In John 21, 1 through 14, we find the following. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples ventured to ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now this is a curious episode. This is the sixth or seventh post-resurrection appearance of Christ that we know of, but is third to a gathering of apostles. Now I say sixth or seventh because the first appearance was to the women on the morning of the resurrection, and because of the individual gospel accounts of that appearance and the way that they're worded, and the fact that they include different details of the encounter, a number of Bible scholars have concluded that Jesus appeared to these women twice, once in the garden and once on the road between the garden tomb and Jerusalem. But I don't think that that's correct. In my reconstruction of the timeline, it looks to me as though the Lord appeared to Mary and the other women only once, and that this appearance took place neither in the garden nor on the road, but in the tomb itself. And if you want to hear more about that, I invite you to go online and listen to lesson number 366 in this series there, A Very Good, Very Bad Day. For the purposes of today's lesson, just know that I count the Lord's encounter with the women that morning as one appearance and not as two. The second appearance then was to Cleopas and his wife Mary on the road to Emmaus, at the end of which the Lord revealed himself to them in the breaking of bread. The third was a private appearance to Simon Peter that same evening, of which we know almost nothing. And the fourth and final appearance of the first Lord's Day, Sunday, April 5, 33 A.D., came late that night when Christ appeared to his whole retinue, absent Thomas, submitted himself to physical examination, ate with them, and then opened their minds that they might understand the Scriptures. The fifth appearance came 8 days later, Monday, April 13, 33 A.D., when the Lord appeared to all of them again, this time specifically for the sake of Thomas. And the sixth appearance is the one under examination today, the appearance on the shore of the Sea of Tiberias. Now, we don't know exactly when this appearance took place, except that it was after the appearance to Thomas and before the appearance to the 500, which Paul tells us about in 1 Corinthians 15:6. However, a number of sources I have read place this appearance another 8 days later on Tuesday, April 21st, 33 A.D., based on some of the math associated with the number 153, which we'll get to next week. Now, I do not find this argument compelling. However, based on the length of time between the fourth and fifth appearances, and based on the knowledge that Christ descended 6 weeks after the resurrection on Sunday, May 17th, and knowing that Christ appeared on 6 different dates, including the day of Ascension, I feel comfortable speculating that all of his appearance dates may well have been 7 or 8 days apart. So if the math points to Tuesday, April 21st for the appearance on the shore of the Sea of Tiberias, I'm willing to accept that date as slightly preferable to any other date that might be named. But before we get into all of that, before we get to the numbers, there are a handful of other things I want to point out about the events of this spring morning in Galilee. And the first is the fact that it takes place in Galilee. John names the place of this appearance as the shore of the Sea of Tiberias, also known as the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, and the Lake of Gennesaret. And this is more than just interesting. This is one of those internal evidences of truth from within the gospel narratives that I've been pointing out all along the way in this series. You may recall that on the day of the resurrection, one of the angels in the tomb told Mary to instruct the apostles to go to Galilee to wait for the Lord. And when Jesus then appeared at the entrance to the tomb, he told them the same. Matthew 28, 7 through 10, Mark 16, 5 through 8, Luke 24, 3 through 7, conflated together with John 20, 11 through 17. Meanwhile, Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she and the other women wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. Entering, they did not find the body of the Lord, and while this set them at naught, Mary saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet, and this alarmed them. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She answered, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." The younger of the two, who was sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. Then go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." Then all at once the two men were standing beside them, dressed in dazzling apparel. And the women, frightened by this, bowed their faces to the ground. And the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the third day rise. Therefore go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, it is as I have told you." At this, being filled with a combination of fear and great joy, and beset with trembling and astonishment, none of them said another word, but they turned to flee the tomb and to run and tell his disciples. And as she turned around, Mary saw Jesus, who had been standing behind her, but she did not recognize him. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary?" Her face lit up, and she said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. But Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Now, for those of you who are here right now and are reading this in your bulletin, you can see that all of the references to Galilee here are in the Synoptic Gospels, appearing in Matthew 28, 7 and 10, Mark 16, 7, and Luke 24, 6. And it's in Matthew 28, 16 that we find the record of the apostles following through on this imperative. Then the 11 disciples left and went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had first ordained them. But John, whose account is completely independent of the other three, makes no mention of the divine command for the apostles to return to Galilee. No, indeed, anyone who read only the Gospel of John would have no knowledge that the Lord ever commanded the apostles to leave Jerusalem and go and await him in Galilee. Yet, almost as if incidentally, John reports to us that the sixth appearance of Christ, his third to the gathered apostles, took place in Galilee. And it's precisely because of this kind of agreement between various books of the Bible that so many students of the Word have been compelled to concede that events recorded in the Bible are actual, factual, historical events and not fictional accounts. Because if it were that the Gospel of John were a pseudonymous work penned by an unknown author long after the death of the apostles, as some skeptics propose, you would think that the perpetrator of this fraud would have taken more care to point out how his account agrees with the other known accounts. But no such attempt is made. No, rather, the Gospel of John comes to us as the testimony of an independent witness, a witness who, quite frankly, seems to be unaware and unconcerned that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke even exist, much less does he seem to have any concern that his account of the life of Christ will be compared to the other accounts. Yet at every turn, John seems to confirm things reported to us by the other Gospel writers, much the same way as he confirms here that the apostles in fact went to Galilee just as instructed, even though he makes no report of the instruction. And to me, the most reasonable explanation for that is carelessness. Carelessness, that is, of the sort borne aloft by truth-tellers, who have no concern for keeping track of their stories because they're telling the truth. And the truth here is that the apostles went to Galilee just as they had been instructed to do. Now, I do find it curious that the apostles did not go to Galilee earlier than they did. As you may recall, last week we looked at the fifth appearance, the appearance to Thomas. And at that time, they had not yet gone to Galilee, but were still in Jerusalem. As it says in John 20:26, 8 days later, his disciples were in the house again. So on Sunday, April 5, the angel in the tomb and the Lord himself told the apostles, through Mary Magdalene, to go to Galilee and that they would see him there. But that same night, before they even really had a chance to head for Galilee, he appeared to them all in Jerusalem. Now, I would have thought that, eager to see him again, they would have set out the next morning for that destination. But 8 days later, on Monday, April 13, they are still in Jerusalem. Indeed, they're still at the same address. They hadn't even so much as crossed the street to get any closer to Galilee. And I've always wondered why that was. Why it was that, in light of very specific instructions from the Lord, they waited as long as they did to act on those instructions. I mean, I suppose they might have stayed in Jerusalem for Thomas's sake. After all, he was absent when the Lord appeared to them and gave them certain tangible proofs of his resurrection, including a demonstration of the nature of the body of his resurrection. And perhaps the apostles reasoned that if Jesus was going to offer the same evidence to Thomas, he would probably do so in the same setting as that of his first appearance to all the apostles. Or maybe Thomas refused to leave Jerusalem until his faith was confirmed and the others stayed behind for his sake. I don't know. As far as I know, the Bible doesn't tell us. But whatever the reason, clearly the apostles did not set out for Galilee for at least 9 days after the Lord had instructed them to go there. And in regard to this, there isn't a word in the Bible about any anxiety on their part or any disappointment or unhappiness with them on the part of the Lord. Now, interestingly, it is an 85-mile walk from Jerusalem to the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, the location where John 21 takes place, which would have taken about 4 days. And with that in view, then the appearance on the shore of the Sea of Tiberias could not have taken place before Sunday, April 19th, assuming that the apostles observed the Sabbath on Saturday, April the 18th. So the date preferred by many, Tuesday the 21st, is not unlikely. That seems to be about the right amount of time for the apostles to have rested, gotten settled in, and to begin to look for something to do. And this brings me to the next thing that I want to draw from this text. In John 21:3, it says, Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. And they said to him, we will go with you. And I find this interesting, because while the apostles do not know what lies ahead in terms of how many appearances the Lord will make, or that he will ascend, or that he will send his Spirit on the day of Pentecost, they do know that he will appear to them at least one more time, because he has promised them this, and they believe him. And though they do not know when he will appear again, they seem to know where in Galilee he will appear. As we read earlier in Matthew 28:16, then the 11 disciples left and went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had first ordained them. Or as this verse reads in many translations, then the 11 disciples went to Galilee unto the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And it doesn't make much difference which of these readings you prefer. It doesn't matter much whether the Lord actually told the apostles where to meet him in Galilee, or whether by intuition the apostles decided to go to the place where it all began in expectation that things ought to come full circle. Either way, the apostles seem to have a definite idea where they need to be in order to be present the next time the Lord appears. Mount Eremos, now known as the Mount of Beatitudes, which is about 2.5 miles inland from the Sea of Galilee between Tabgha and Capernaum. And that begs the question, why didn't they stay there to wait for him? I mean, they saw what happened when Thomas was out doing whatever it was he was doing on the first Lord's Day, and the Lord appeared to the gathered apostles. He missed out. Now, the Lord was gracious to him and appeared to him as well, but the apostles know, or at least they ought to know, that it isn't wise to count on the Lord's indulgence. As it says in Deuteronomy 6:16, do not put the Lord your God to the test. So why were they willing to be anywhere other than exactly where they anticipated that the Lord would appear? Well, again, the Bible doesn't tell us, at least not in so many words. Nevertheless, I find the fact that they felt free to do so highly instructive. First, because it demonstrates that their relationship with the Lord and their confidence in him was such that they did not find his commands hectoring. Yes, they understood, as we read in Psalm 111:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and a good understanding is the possession of those who keep his commandments. And again in Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of holy things is understanding. And Proverbs 15:33, the fear of the Lord is instruction in wisdom, and humility comes before honor. But though John had yet to write these words down, they also understood what the Apostle Jesus loved told us in 1 John 4:16 through 18. We know and have complete confidence in the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. So while they are keen to do as the Lord had commanded them, they do not do so as those living under tyranny, walking on eggshells, living in ever-present fear of getting something wrong. No, they know that the Lord is to appear to them at the mountain where he first ordained them, but quite apparently they do not feel that they are out of bounds as long as they are, say, within sight of that mountain. Now, who knows? Only 7 of them leave the mountain to go fishing, so it could be that they had set up some kind of signaling or messaging system, some way for the others to alert them if the Lord should appear on the mountain while they were absent. That would certainly be a reasonable measure to take. But if they did have such a system in place, we have no record of it. And if such a system was in place, it appears that they did not make use of it to alert the other dozen or so followers of Christ in their party to the fact that the Lord was on the beach when he appeared to them there. No, the others missed out. And there's not a word of regret, not a word of concern about that anywhere in the Bible. Now, I think it's important to point out that this appearance, the appearance on the shore of the Sea of Tiberias, was a surprise appearance. This is not, most scholars think, the appearance that the Lord was speaking of when he told them to go to Galilee and await him there. And neither is the next appearance, the appearance to the 500 brethren, or the one after that, the appearance to James. No, the anticipated appearance would seem to be his final appearance, the appearance he made when he gave the Great Commission and then ascended into the heavens. But that notwithstanding, the Lord told the apostles to go to an appointed place and wait for him there, and they felt free at ease to wait for him near there. And as it turns out, that was okay with Jesus. Not only that, but it appears that the apostles anticipated that it would be okay with Jesus. Perhaps because they're already anticipating the law of the Spirit of life in Christ. And as such, they know on an intuitive level what Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 3:4 through 6. Such is the confidence that we have through Christ toward God. Not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter but the Spirit, for the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Now, not everyone who hears this message will appreciate that. But those of us who were Nadab and Abihud to death growing up in the church, constantly concerned that we might mistake an innovation for an expedient, will understand why this is important. Because before they even knew what grace was, the apostles' knowledge of the Lord and of his heart and of his disposition toward them had informed them of what Paul would later write down in 2 Corinthians 3:12 through 17. Since we have such a hope, we are very bold. Not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to an end, but their minds were hardened. For to this day, when they read the Old Covenant, that same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ is it taken away. Yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts, but when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And there's something else that they understood as well. Something that I think some Christians would benefit from learning. And that is that it is blessed to wait upon the Lord. As we read in Isaiah 40:31, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. But, and this is vitally important, while we wait upon the Lord, life goes on. Thus, while Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:31, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God, he also says in Ephesians 5:15 through 16, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise men, redeeming the time, for the days are evil. And as he said to the Athenians in Acts 17:22, men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are far too religious. Beloved, it is blessed to wait on the Lord. But while we wait, life goes on. And the apostles, it appears, understood that. The Lord told them to go to Galilee and wait for him there, and 10 or so days later, they got high behind and headed for Galilee. And when they got there, they went to the place where the Lord had told them to go, but within a few days of arriving there, they became restless. Maybe because, as it says in Proverbs 16:27 in the TLB, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And again in Proverbs 19:15, slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. But I really don't think so. No, Jesus had instructed them to go to Galilee and wait, and I seriously doubt that those in his retinue who made that journey and who were anticipating the Lord's arrival would have felt that they were in any way being slothful or shirking in their duties. Rather, it seems much more likely to me that once they arrived in Galilee and got settled in, they were faced with a choice between dedicating all of their time to waiting on the Lord or doing some other things while they waited. And they chose, wisely in my opinion, to busy themselves with other things while they waited. In Luke 17:34 through 35, Jesus, speaking of the day of the Lord, says, I tell you, in that night there will be 2 men in one bed. One will be taken and the other left. There will be 2 women grinding together. One will be taken and the other left. And in Matthew 24:40, he adds, 2 men will be on the pitch. One will be taken and the other left. Now, this is not part of my experience, but I know that many of you were told growing up that you shouldn't go to the picture show, because when the Lord shall return, the last thing you want is to be caught doing something unproductive for the kingdom. Well, Jesus anticipated that people would be doing all kinds of different things when he returned, and in every circumstance he names whatsoever those people in that moment were doing. He says that some of them will be taken and some of them will be left, whether they are at work, at rest, or at play. And I find it interesting to note that of the places where the Lord proposes that people might be when he returns, none of them are at the temple, none of them are at the synagogue, none of them are at church. Now, the examples Jesus gives are intended to be representative, not exhaustive, so we shouldn't make too much hay over any example that is not given. Nevertheless, it is instructive to observe that the apostles, knowing that the saved are free at ease to sleep, work, or play while they wait for the Lord to come on the last day, also seem to know that they were free at ease to go fishing while they waited for the Lord to come on this day. Which is as much to say, they knew they didn't have to wait for him at church. After all, at this point, they had been at church 24/7 for over 2 weeks. All the believers had been gathered together, studying, worshiping, praying, and sharing their testimony with one another for no fewer than 15 days. So by this time, I would imagine that they're all pretty much churched out. Now, I don't know that this is what you expected to hear me say today. Most people don't expect to hear this from their preacher. If anything, you might expect me to go to Hebrews 10, 24 through 25, where it says, "And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. And indeed, no one should forsake the assembly." We should all be in church whenever we can be, but by the same token, I have led a lot of retreats. I have done a lot of rallies. I have directed a number of Bible camps where people are basically at church all week for a whole week, and I have to say that sometimes it gets to be a little much. There's only so much church that a person can take before they get a little stir-crazy. And that's the sense that I get when I read this passage. Now, I realize that Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen by trade, and it could be that the only reason they went fishing in John 21 was because they were hungry, or because they needed to generate a little income. But there's zero indication of anything like that in this passage. No one says we're about out of food, so we better go scare something up. And there's no indication that the apostles were low on funds. No, every indication is that Peter's urge to go fishing comes out of the blue. In John 21:3, it says, "Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. And they said to him, we will go with you. And they went out and got into the boat. And they stayed out on the boat all night long. 7 guys, only 4 of whom knew anything about fishing." Now, I realize that it was not uncommon for fishermen to fish all night. But think about it. I mean, I'm no fisherman. I don't know anything about fishing. I don't like to eat fish. I tend to get seasick when I'm on the water. But if I had been at church for 360 hours straight and the preacher said, "Let's take a break, let's go do something else for a while," I would have been in that boat forthwith. And all night long, no matter what beset us in our skiff, I would have been thinking to myself, thank God that while we wait, life goes on. Thank God I have this to do while I wait. And I could be wrong, but I'm willing to wager that everyone aboard that boat felt better, felt more at ease, felt more relaxed, felt more himself than any of them had felt at any time in the previous 2 weeks. And it was then when they were completely themselves. It was then when their guard was down. It was then when they had spent a whole night on the lake blowing off steam. It was then when they were redeeming the time, for the days are evil, that the Lord appeared to them. And Peter was so happy to see him that he couldn't wait for the rest of them to row the boat in. No, he dove straight into the water and swam 100 yards to shore to get to him as quickly as he could. And he was the first to arrive on shore with the Lord. Now, I've run out of time for this morning's lesson. I have more I want to say about John 21. I mean, I've only read half of this account, and we haven't even gotten to the conversation between Jesus and Peter as they walk along the shore. And there's still a great deal more to cover just involving the miraculous draught of the 153 fish. For instance, what are we to make of the fact that exactly 153 fish were caught in this miracle? Is there some hidden meaning in that number? And what about the 154th fish? What became of it? Come back next week, and I'll tell you. That's my lesson for today.
This has been a presentation of the Steamboat Church of Christ. We hope that you have found Dr. Becker's message well appointed. To hear more lessons like this one, visit our website at www.steamboatchurch.org or come see us at 1698 Lincoln Avenue in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Bible classes are Sunday mornings at 9:30 and worship services are at 10:30. We look forward to meeting you. Until then, may the grace and peace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you.